I'm joined now by someone who has worked extensively in the BBC, but viewers are perhaps most familiar with his producing work. I would like to introduce David Conroy. How are you?
Hi, I'm well, thank you. I hope you're well as well.
Oh, very good, thank you. But I was curious, how did you start off at the BBC?
I should like to preface something because your viewers might be interested in the fact that although I am quite well known, I like to think, or used to be well known as a television producer, I started out life as a physicist. I read physics at Queen Mary College, now known as Queen Mary University in the East End of London. And I enjoyed physics. I still take a great interest in physics and science in general. But I took less interest in physicists. And I decided when I left university that I really didn't want to work with physicists. And I have to say, I then spent the next 6 months of my life unemployed, which was a bit unfortunate. And then I felt I needed to earn some money and became a scientific journalist, which was halfway house, I suppose. And a girlfriend at that time said, why don't you try and become a stage manager in television? And I wrote application letters after application letters after application letters and kept getting rejected until one August, just before the August bank holiday, I got a call from what was then ATV television. And they said, this was on a Friday, and the bank holiday was the Monday. Can you start work on Monday? And it turned out that an assistant stage manager had broken their leg and they couldn't get a replacement because it was the bank holiday. And I had never done any stage management work at all. Fortunately, my girlfriend could fill me in over the weekend because she was fully fledged stage manager. And I managed to hoodwink people for 2 weeks and get away with it. And I did an ASM's job at ATV. And for some reason or other, they seemed pleased with what I'd done. And I did quite a bit of work for ATV and then graduated to being a full stage manager, which really meant marking out the set in a rehearsal room so that the actors during rehearsal knew where they had to move to and keeping them on the book so that they could learn their lines. And then round about 1963, the BBC started recruiting staff because they were starting BBC Two in 1964. And I applied and I got a job there as a production assistant. And the production assistant acted as, if you like, the liaison between the director and the cast, and also all the technical people involved. So if the director said, I think I would like to have a chest of drawers or a sofa or anything, in fact, in that corner of the room, it was up to the production assistant to make sure that the designer knew what the director wanted. If the director had to go somewhere, the production assistant would help the cast go through their paces in the director's absence. And I learnt that job on the job again, and that was quite good and good fun. And once again, one started I started by shadowing a couple of PAs and then got my first break. And that break was on Doctor Who. And that was not quite an easy initiation. At that time, Doctor Who was recorded in Lime Grove Studios, which were very old studios indeed, and quite decrepit. They were, as soon as the television centre was built, well, it was built by then, but as soon as space was made, Doctor Who moved there because it made tremendous demands on crews, and especially design, because once again, this is in 1964, 65, it was the very first start of Doctor Who. And the special effects in those days were really done manually. CGI didn't exist. I mean, you had stagehands hauling things into place to create an effect. You had people pulling ropes, and you had mirrors moved to reflect things. It was horrendous. In fact, it was the heaviest job I have ever done. And we did it weekly, and I think we recorded on a Friday. I can't recall, it's a long time ago, but I think every Friday I lost 3 kilos in weight. Mind you, over the weekend I put it back on, but the next Friday I lost it again. And I did quite a few Doctor Who's, and I remember my parents having a photograph of me showing someone what to do, and they displayed it very proudly in their living room because there was their son David being a PA and telling people what to do. Made them very proud, because Doctor Who was a very prestigious show to going out on a Saturday evening, and my parents, who had never had anyone in television or indeed university before, so it was their centerpiece in their room. Now, during that time, I worked with various directors, Boris Hussein, Frank Cox, Rex Tucker, and it was really hard work, but really enjoyable, because we were breaking new ground with the way we operated. This was with the first Doctor Who was Bill Hartnell, and his companions were Carol Ann Ford and Bill Russell. And Carol Ann Ford and Bill Russell were absolute charmers. Bill Hartnell, I think sometimes thought he was Doctor Who. Well, to say he was irascible is perhaps being rude to him, but he did think that if he pressed a button in TARDIS, something would happen. And he didn't realize that there were 25 people behind the scenes doing that something to happen. But it was a really magnificent team effort. And I have done many films, not many films, I've done many shows. I've made a few films, I've done many shows, and many of them with much larger crews, much larger casts, much bigger budgets. But I don't think I've ever done anything which so depended on everything that the crew did happening at the crucial moment together. It was quite remarkable. It was perhaps the greatest team effort I've ever worked on. The only time that it didn't work was when the producer, and the producer was God. I became one later on, but so that's another matter. And the producer, after the way we worked was we rehearsed Monday through to Thursday. Friday mornings we plotted the scenes for the cameramen, and then towards the evening, the producer would come down for a producer's run so they could see what the show was going to look like. They then gave notes to the director. The director passed notes on to the cast and the crew. Adjustments were made, and then we recorded the show. And we recorded the show as if it was live. So you just did it, start, finish. You could edit it, but it was a very expensive and cumbersome process, so you tried not to do that. Well, on one occasion on this, and it only once didn't work, was when the director came down after the director's run and gave a note not to the director. Sorry, the producer came down, gave a note not to the director, but to the lighting director. And when we came to do the show, it was unviewable. We recorded it and you couldn't see it. She'd asked him to make shadows where she wanted shadows, and you just could not see the program. So we had to relight it and reshoot it. And one of the jobs of the production assistant was to write a log the next morning of the show. And if you overran, because it ran into overtime, you had to explain why. And I think that at that time, so I did that. And at that time, I think I had the record of the only PA who ever wrote as the reason for the overtime costs was the producer interfered when she shouldn't.
So as a production assistant, how did you become a producer? Did you go via the directing route first?
I moved on through the BBC, and I was very lucky because the due process was that a PA would go, after a couple of years of being a PA, onto the director's training course, and then would be given a few shows to direct. And that's where I met Frank, actually, Frank Cox. He'd been given a couple of shows to direct at of Doctor Who, and I worked with him and enjoyed it very much. Except we always had to push Frank to get a decision from him, but he was a good director. And if you were good at your directing, you would get a full-time contract with the BBC, or you'd get contracts with other people, and that your career either took off or it didn't. And I felt that I really wanted to know how long I would have to wait before I went onto the course, because that was the due process at the BBC. And I went to see my staff manager, and I said, when would I be going on? And he said, well, give it a couple of years, David, because there's a lot of people. We took on a lot when BBC Two started. So there are a lot of you itching to go onto the director's course. I said, fine, now I know. And then I went home and I thought about it. I thought, actually, I don't want to be a director. I want to be a producer. And it takes a certain sort of person to be a producer and a certain sort of person to be a director. The director does a lot of the creative work, most of the creative work, in fact. But the producer, or the way I saw a producer working, has the idea and creates the atmosphere for the director to start work on the detail. And then the producer finishes off the job. The director obviously does the edit. Then the producer works with the director on the edit. And then in the outside world, not at the BBC, but in the outside world, the producer then sells the film or whatever. And that sounded like much more fun to me. So I went back to my staff manager and I said, actually, I think someone should know that I don't really want to finish up as a director, I want to finish up as a producer. And in those days, most of the producers at the BBC were superannuated ex-directors. They were, of a certain age. And he said, well, I'll make a note of that, but it's highly unlikely you'll be a producer for quite some time. 2 months later, he called me and he said, David, you said you wanted to be a producer. Well, in 2 months' time, you're it. And that was the biggest stroke of luck I ever had. And I don't know if it's true or not, but there was a story going around that I, by the way, got what turned out to be the most prestigious slot in the BBC there was in those times, the classic BBC Two classic serial. Now, at that time, it was going downhill. It was getting worse and worse viewing figures. And the producer was retiring. And the rumor went round the BBC, at least amongst the young people at the BBC, the ones who were itching to get advancement, that I had been chosen to front a show which was failing in order for it to fail with me there. And they say, well, we gave one of you a chance. And in fact, so just hold your horses. And I don't know if that's true or not. But by luck, by dint of work, I don't know what it was, I like to think I made it a success. The figures started going up. And eventually, I made quite a few successes. And I eventually finished up as a producer of I think the biggest show that the BBC did. Certainly it was the most expensive, and that was War and Peace in 1970, not the recent one, but in 1970. It was in 20 episodes starring Anthony Hopkins, and it was greeted very well, I like to think. And on that basis, with that sort of success under my belt, I left the BBC, because there was really the only place for me to go after that was into the administrative area, and I didn't want to be in admin.
And how different was the freelance world to that of the BBC?
So I knocked around doing the odd job here and the odd job there. And in fact, at one point, I was invited to Granada Films to see if they thought I was suitable to be head of drama there. In the event they thought I wasn't suitable to be head of drama there. But one of the questions they asked me was, how much television did you produce at the BBC? And I said, about 40 hours a year. And they said, 14, that's a lot. I said, no, not 14, 40. And they said, was that with repeats? And I said, no, with repeats it was about 65. They still didn't offer me the job. But I joined London Films and had a ball. We did some co-productions with BBC, and I made two films. We did two films for American television, which were The Scarlet Pimpernel with Anthony Andrews, and I said I'd mention India. I made Kim in India with Peter O'Toole, which was quite exciting. And I filmed The Country Girls, the Edna O'Brien novel, as a movie, which was really, it was an art house movie, and as such it succeeded, but it did not set the world on fire. And after that, I really did quite a bit of freelance work, and I gained a reputation for being able to do a lot of co-productions in Europe. I became quite known for knowing how the European market worked. And as such, I co-produced a film which was quite successful, Vincent and Theo, about Vincent van Gogh, which Robert Altman directed, and that did very well, I think. And I then did, and this was a really exhausting job, I made 27 half-hour dramas called Coup de Foudre, First Love, or Love at First Sight, beg your pardon, Love at First Sight, across the world. And that was a co-production between an Italian company, a German company, and a French company. The Italian company was headed by Berlusconi, to mention about 27 names in one word. And that kept me, I suppose, away from home for about 2.5 years, really. I was, for example, commuting to Rio de Janeiro for quite a bit, and we filmed from Rio through Morocco, through Poland, and Italy, obviously Germany, France, the UK. I did occasionally get to see my wife and children, but it was, and I suppose that really sort of exhausted me, and I retired. That is the end of the tale of David Conroy.
So how did War and Peace come about? Because it's a landmark drama.
There's another interesting BBC story in that. Before I did War and Peace, I signed a new contract with the BBC in 1967 as producer of special projects. And I wanted to do something I'm not sure many people will be aware of. There was an American writer writing in the 1920s and 1930s, and then he wrote 10 novels in that period, and then he wrote an 11th novel in 1950, a writer called Upton Sinclair, who he won a Pulitzer Prize for a couple of the novels, and they were called it was called the World's End series, and he was, in American terms, a socialist, which was a slightly dirty word in those times in America. It's an even dirtier word in America these days, and I thought it was brilliant. And so did the BBC. They thought the series was a very good idea, and we commissioned Jack Pullman to write that. And I set off, it was agreed that I would set off to the United States to try and find co-production money that would help if I did that. But it was there was another department in the BBC which thought that they should be doing the search for co-production money and not me, and that they didn't like the idea of the film because of the series, and they quite probably were right in that they wouldn't be able to get money for a socialist series in the United States. So the BBC pulled the thing, they paid Jack off and said to me, David, come back with another idea. I'm sorry about that, but come back with another idea. So I said, I went away and I thought about it and I said, I'd like to make the Odyssey. I'd like to take a film crew around the Mediterranean for 6 months. We've just filmed the Odyssey. And the answer came back, oh, we can't afford that. So I said, I don't think you're going to like any of my ideas. And they said, no, David, we like your ideas. It's just, you know. So I said, okay, and I went away. And then I thought of something which, in the BBC's terms, had to be right, but I thought they couldn't possibly do it. And I went back and I said, War and Peace, because it's so big, they couldn't possibly do it. And they said, yes. Then I had to think, how do you do it? And I certainly wasn't going to do it in the 6 hours that was the way it was recently done. And I spent 18 months working out how to do it. And we decided 20 hours was right. And the BBC, in my opinion, wisely agreed to 20 hours and commissioned Jack Pullman to write it, having well, Jack was right for it anyway, but having promised him the Upton Sinclair, this was right for Jack as well. And indeed, John Davis had been promised the Upton Sinclair, and John Davis directed War and Peace as well. And alas, poor Jack is dead, but I see John Davis regularly now. So there's another BBC story, but that's how War and Peace happened. But War and Peace was, although I said that Doctor Who was the most complex thing, and it depended on everybody doing everything at the right moment in the right way, War and Peace was really complex. We had, I went around Europe trying to hire an army because we needed the battles for the battle scenes. And I went to see, I found the ideal location in Austria, but it was on military of defense land. And so I had to get the Prime Minister's permission, and I wrote to the Prime Minister, and he said, he wrote back saying, no, and don't write to me again. And that was the sum total of the letter. We had the choice between Hungary and what was then Yugoslavia. And Yugoslavia had the better locations, and we chose Yugoslavia.
And I appreciate you're working on different scales and different roles, but the challenges of Doctor Who, how different were they to War and Peace?
In War and Peace, we had to have the Russian army advancing, sorry, I beg your pardon, the French army advancing on Moscow. Now, Moscow we didn't have. So we did a special effect, which was painted glass. I don't know if you know about that, but we had a large pane of glass on a hilltop and an artist painted Moscow in the background, as if it was distant. And he painted, and he allowed for a track in the valley below. And we had a dozen carts, 20 cannon, 2,000 men. We literally had 2,000 men march through in the valley, and you could see through the glass. We shot through the glass. So it looked as if they were advancing on Moscow. And the artist, the glass artist, had painted shadows. So we had to shoot it between 11 and 12 o'clock in the morning. And we shot it, and everyone was in a congratulatory mode. And I suddenly saw the cameraman get very pale and walk away from the camera. And I went over to him and I said, "What's wrong?" And he said, "I had the wrong filter in." So I told the director, he told the assistant, and we had to turn these 20 carts, these 20 cannon, these 2,000 men round and get them back to their starting position and get them through by 11 o'clock. It was quite a task, but we succeeded.
Only a production of that scale do you have, I suppose, such problems like that. But just going back to Doctor Who for a second, I believe your first story was with John Gorey. How was he to work with? Had you worked with him before?
I never worked with John. I didn't work with John. I knew John very well, but I never worked with him. It's one of those things. I tried to get him to direct one of my classic serials, but I never worked with John.
But you mentioned that you did work with Frank Cox, and on one of his Doctor Who's, it was sort of split between Frank doing the latter half and Mervyn Pinfield doing the first. How different was it to have two directors on one project? Was it noticeably different?
No, because in the early days, the episodes were, in a way, self-sufficient. Although the theme was the same throughout, they were self-contained within the theme. That was really down to the writer rather than the director.
I suppose one challenge that I suppose any Doctor Who has is the monsters. How were they to work with? They must have kept you particularly busy.
In the early days of Doctor Who, and I only worked in the early days, there weren't that many prosthetics. But yes, there were a few. And no, everyone really, there was a great feeling of camaraderie, and everyone thought they were doing something different and something new. And so everyone just helped everyone else. It was really lovely. I enjoyed it, in spite of losing weight.
Well, I think on that note, I'd just like to say thank you very much for your time, David. We've scratched the surface of your career, but thank you for your time.
It was my pleasure. Thank you.